focus our policies around that. And the joke of this is that, so this was presented to the government and the government said, yes, please. Basically meaning we had to go back and incorporate all those three very different approaches into one kind of policy mix, which is how we ended up with the mission-driven top sector innovation policy. That means that is a rather complex structure. That is, somebody used the word scaffolding yesterday, that we use as scaffolding to work towards a very clear goal, which is a net zero country in 2015, with sub goals that we established as well. That was the anecdote. Can you go to the next slide, please? What we'll discuss for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll try to keep brief, is some fast facts about the Netherlands, a little bit of background, which I already gave you a little bit of, what we do to see how we can progress the mission and really get that acceleration going, which is really difficult. There's an annual cycle around that. I don't know if we're going to get to that, and I'm going to give you a few examples and challenges, and then I'm going to leave it to Manuel to facilitate, hopefully, a really interesting discussion. Go ahead. Yeah. So, as I already mentioned, the top sectors were established in 2011. This was at the time of an economic crisis. R&D has come to a standstill almost in the Netherlands due to this. In order to kind of get that motor going again, top sectors were installed. There are, I'd say, 8 in total. You're no help. And these are sectors in which the Netherlands has been economically very strong. So there's an agriculture one, there's an energy one, of course. There's a bunch. On top of that, we built that mission-driven policy. We have 4 overarching missions. One of them is the net zero mission, and that is the one that we're going to be talking about today. This mission, of course, has a subset of missions, because a net zero mission is way too abstract. You need to really cut that down into kind of more bite-sized pieces, which we've done in several layers. So we have, from the one net zero mission, we have 7 underlying missions, which are related to the electricity system, built environment, agriculture, mobility, circular economy, nuclear energy, and system integration. I think that was 7, right? Just to give you a flavor of what that looks like. Could you go to the next slide? Interesting. Well, some of the examples that would arise from those missions that to really make it even more granular are listed here. So a really good example of a very granular piece, like an agenda that's underneath the missions, is the generation of more efficient, quieter heat pumps to make them more acceptable for people to actually install, to make them cheaper, for instance. Just one of the very many examples of how we kind of structured the mission to a lower level to make it a lot more tangible and workable for the field to take it somewhere. All right, could you move to the next one? You still have my old slides, I think. That's sure. Okay. This is so wordy.
I think they're getting up low.
That's all right. It's no problem. Let me see. What can I say about this? So when we work on the mission in practice, that means that together with government, top sectors, and knowledge institutes. In the Netherlands, we have institutes like TNO, NWO. They are really renowned research institutes that work with all the universities in the Netherlands. We have the top sectors who really represent the sectors. So they, what they do in practice, for instance, what the main role of the top sectors is to find, to kind of facilitate the right collaboration between businesses and knowledge institutions, and make sure that they work together and use the public fund, mix it with private funds, and work on the innovations that we well, that we mentioned in the emissions. So that's part of their role. So altogether, we kind of create those agendas. We do that on an annual basis. So every year we look back and we look forward. What innovations came about last year that are progressing the energy transition? What didn't come about that we need to start working on? So looking at next year, we know how to program for the funds that we have available for innovation for the energy transition. How we govern this, that is completely, I've been here for a year and a half now. I am still not entirely sure how everything works, and I'm responsible for it. So that makes it that maybe that says something about me, but it also says something about the incredible complexity of all the little wheels in a machine that have to turn at the same time, and that are influenced by a number of different factors for it to progress. But the fact that it is progressing is something that I believe in. It's very hard to measure. We do try to measure every year what innovations have come about. We report on that, and then based on that reporting, we try to move onto the next phase of innovation. And that's what that annual cycle in the end is about. Could you move to the next slide? Well, I already mentioned it. There's a few really big challenges to have a mission in mind and to actually make it work on the ground as policymakers. Again, the evaluation, the monitoring, the programming of these missions on a macro and a micro level, they require a lot of flexibility of mind and of mindset to be able to govern this and to be able to let go of some things that you cannot control, to really push on things that you can control, and to be flexible in that when you feel like things are not moving. So it requires a lot of imaginative power from the policymakers to kind of go from that really high level to the nitty-gritty level. The decision-making process is very vague, because who is the one in the end that decides what innovations we are going to be promoting, or the directionality of the mission, if you will. That is a decision that nobody, not one person or one body can make. It is a decision that we all make, but that makes it really difficult to pinpoint who do we need to ask what the directionality is going to be of our mission. And with directionality, to make it a little more tangible, I mean, so we want to head to net zero, but do we want to use nuclear in that space? Do we want to use energy from water? Is that something that's going to be a useful mix to the energy, a useful element in the energy mix that we need in 2050? How do we decide if it's not? It's not, I can tell you. And who decides that? And how do you make sure that policy supports that decision? Those are a few of the really difficult questions that we ask ourselves all the time, and that we try to structure in this governance framework. I'm not going to give away too much, because you need something to think about. The last big challenge is and that is what we can definitely discuss as well, is the siloed, the kind of the mission as a silo. So we have a CO2 reduction, or actually net zero mission, but there's many other elements touching that are in relation to that mission. How do you make sure that the decision you're making here is not counterproductive to decision made somewhere else, whether that's within our same government or in a city or at a lower government level? That is a really big challenge, especially with such a big mission. I was telling Jacopo yesterday, Moonshot is such an inspiring example, but in my opinion, net zero is so much more complex than the challenge of becoming net zero as a country, but also as a world, is so much more complex, and it touches so many more things than getting a person on the moon, which was of course incredible. I don't want to downplay that. But the complexity of it is really big. So you need people who can somewhat grasp that complexity, have some humility towards the role that we can play as an individual, but even as a government or as a country. But still be enthusiastic about, keeping up the work to steer that oil tanker into the right direction, that we think that we've all decided that it needs to go. So that. Do I have a next slide? Well, I think that was most of the important thing. Let me leave something to answer for later. Is there anybody who has any questions about that? Sure.
I will not ask you to make a politically sensitive statement. I know you're a civil servant, but of course, it's not the only country, but in the Netherlands, there's lots of discussion on environmental policy.
Yeah.
It's not this harmonious, everybody agrees on nitrogen pollution. So how, and one discussion that I've heard in these days, many civil servants have, is the fact that innovation and industrial policy is somewhat less politically connotated, less controversial. So to embed environmental issues and climate goals into innovation industrial policy is also a matter of making sure that the policy lasts longer than the election cycle. Was that any of these considerations going on in the Netherlands? Because my impression is that this climate policy is really kind of like embedded into this top sector, into this technological innovation, not somewhat separate, kind of together. Was that one of the reasons why it was structured this way?
So that would be cunning, but perhaps in a way, well, yes. As you may or may not know, we just a new cabinet was announced yesterday or this week anyway.
As we speak.
As we speak, we're still waiting on who the ministers are going to be. Very exciting. This is going to be quite a right-wing government that we're getting. What has been done in the past by government officials, by us, by building this policy, but also by embedding a few of the things that we decided upon back in 2017 when we were very ambitious about climate, was very smartly embedded in the law, in policies, and not just in like one policy, but in the breadth of policies that we have in relation to the economy and to climate and energy. So to break that down has become very difficult. I used a metaphor of an oil tanker earlier. That is what this is. So that is what the design is. So it's something that is really big, very. You can steer it a little bit, but it's not easily phased by political changes because that would not be very strategic or long-term thinking. So we've tried to be very strategic about how we build that scaffolding around the goals policy-wise to make sure that it's strategic and sustainable for the long term. And that resulted in a very complex structure, but that does keep it safe somewhat from political turmoil like we have now. Yeah, not entirely safe, mostly safe. Sure.
Earlier, I'm very interested in the fact that we've got a ministry, we've got economic affairs and climate funded.
Right.
Obviously, the Netherlands is an agriculturally dominated country with huge land and for dairying and also huge economic dependence on agriculture. I'm very interested in this tension or at least perceived tension that sits between these two spaces.
Yeah.
And I'm also quite interested historically in terms of sort of when the ministry was created and whether or not you see that as having been like a really enabling capacity for them leaning into the mission space. You've already got quite a cross-cutting lens between these tensions and balances across the economy.
So your question is, how do we deal with agricultural emissions?
And how has the structure of being economy and climate
Yeah.
enabled that
Yeah. So that's rather new, and that's really very simply money driven. So when a new government decided to allocate a significant amount of money towards climate, which was the first time, I think it was 2017, we had who's gonna spend that money? How are we gonna do this? What are we gonna do with it? They added the word climate to the Ministry of Economic Affairs, so it's and then they built around that a climate and energy teams. So expanded immensely over the last few years, which has been a really big learning curve. But it was that simple. So it was a political choice to allocate a vast amount of money towards the energy transition in all its facets and climate change. So there's also, of course, a mitigating aspect to that. And built a ministry around it. And as a matter of fact, we have, in this new structure, we're going to be separated from economic affairs, and we're going to be the Ministry of Climate and Green Growth, I believe. So I have a new job here. Yeah. But I literally heard this yesterday, so it's still a little new to me. It's still selling.
Area one, and then 3 more questions. Yeah.
Yeah, very quick tracking. I mean, the session after, I'm talking about KPI, clock seconds. That's about innovation, but what do you say innovation? Like technological innovation, social innovation?
Very good question. Yeah.
Because in the energy sector, like,
yeah,
especially in the Netherlands, most of the things that are there would be enough to substantially reduce the footprint of the Netherlands, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So it's we have a slightly easier because the energy transition is always perceived as a very technological transition, right? And in a sense it is. But to ensure that we're just not focusing on the technology, it also needs to be embedded in society. The idea, but also the actual technology, the difference in the new way of thinking about energy use, what we buy, and we try to ensure that that is happening when we're innovating. So we have, and now this is part of the complexity. We have a few cross-cutting themes that are working together, and these are literal people working on these cross-cutting teams to make sure that the TKIs, so the top sectors, are embedding this in their innovation creation, if you will. And these are
Responsible.
Yeah, responsible, societally responsibly innovating, which is really about what is this innovation going to do with the actual environment or with people. Is that been thought about? So when you're innovating, for instance, a good example that may work. For instance, we are building a lot of wind turbines in the Netherlands, well, actually in the North Sea, a lot. And that's great because they generate green energy. But things like the paint that we use to coat the base underwater may be toxic. So that's an innovation. That's something that we find important to work on. So and we have those cross-cutting themes to make sure that we are on edge about those types of things. Also, isolating walls, which really helps with reducing the use of energy. But there's bats in walls, lots of walls in the Netherlands. Apparently, these are protected species. How do we isolate wolves in a way that will not kill a bunch of bats, that lock them up? So those kinds of innovations are also things we're working on. We also have a human capital agenda. Super difficult to, we simply don't have enough people to actually make the energy to work for the energy transition. So there's a group of people working on making sure that we have enough people doing the right studies, making sure people are learning new things or new skills. Also thinking about migration or technology that will reduce the need for actual people to do the work. That's just two of the cross-cutting themes. There's a few more, but I may get into that later. But thanks, it was a great question. Yeah.
My question was on the
regarding the governance.
Yes.
How you were governing, so maybe diving deeper
Mhm.
into the points that you point out. So you talked about the top sectors, and I really relate to that in our region, in the Basque region. There's one strategy, government strategy, and they have what they call reference centers.
Mm.
So reference centers are what I understand maybe similar to
Sure,
sectors.
yeah.
So some of them are public foundations, some of them are private foundations, maybe public funded, and they are independent from government,
Right.
but they have legitimacy to influence in policy making.
Yeah.
But they are activating innovation ecosystems
Yeah.
in specific topic areas.
Sounds
So
good. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
curious to understand if it's something similar.
Yeah.
And then, so in regarding these top sectors and the governmental missions,
Mhm.
where is the decision-making power?
Yeah.
And so how you're distributing that decision-making?
Yeah.
And who has the legitimacy then to
Yeah.
influence that policy
Well,
making?
yeah. That's very difficult. So aside from top sectors, I should mention, we also have mission teams, which are also, yeah, it gets worse. We have mission teams. These consist of people representing all the three, that in that triangle between knowledge institutions, the business, the sector, and government. These mission teams are kind of they kind of validate what we are doing. So the idea is that top sectors are doing the real work in the sector, making the innovations happen, developing consortia to apply for grants, making constructions to really get the innovations going. Then we have the government deciding on the policies, deciding on the direction, if you will, or having an idea about the greater direction, the greater strategy. And then we have the mission teams who kind of validate what are we doing in policy, what is happening in the market, makes that come together. So when you ask them, they'll be like, we have no decision power, but their influence is very big. And that's what I said. It can't really pinpoint who makes the decisions. It's everybody together. This is Dutch. We live in a polder country, and it's very democratic. Everybody gets a say. Nobody's a big leader or anything. So the idea is that the decision is made together and everybody kind of agree, which you would think, results in kind of vanilla type of solutions. But I like to think differently. I think it's working well for us.
Just maybe you don't even need to explain more, but my question was basically says that you had top sectors before, and then you introduced the missionary, and kind of thinking what it changed. What was the most important change in the way you did policy to that?
Good. Well, I think it's mostly the directionality. So before, top sectors were really just about getting the economy, keeping the economy going, making sure innovation doesn't matter where or how it's happening. Very market oriented. That when we overlaid it with the mission structure, it became very much more societal. We have that there's a greater good that we are chasing, and it is not keeping our country rich or something. There's a bigger goal. And that directionality really changed also the structure of the top sector. So they became much more focused on what do we need to do to reach that goal, instead of what do we need to do to, keep the economy afloat in difficult times.
Andrew, I know your name.
The model you described, it sounds very sensible. And sounds like it makes sense from a kind of top-down Ministry of Finance point of view.
Right.
But most people don't work in the Ministry of Finance. What's the practical experience of people that work in, education or health or, energy departments? How do what's the incentive infrastructure that sits around them that enables them to work with other people?
That's an excellent question. I'm going to make it even more complex. So overarching, we have themes.
Maybe you can draw it at this point.
No, because it's really messy. I tried. I wanted to make a slide. It was like, nobody's going to like this. Because we've tried to put this into slides, but it's been very, very difficult. We have overarching themes. So there is a theme team with with representatives from, this is so Dutch, I'm embarrassed to tell you, with representatives from the other ministries, so also from education, also from agriculture, also from internal affairs, external affairs. So pretty much everybody who has anything to do with the mission and who needs that somehow to trickle down into their ministries, but also into the other top sectors. So the top sectors for agriculture, the top sectors for health, they're all represented in this theme. They get together 4 times a year, and they discuss. Well, they can't really discuss because it's like 60 people, but we present to them. We present to them our evaluation and our programming at these times. So that's part of the annual cycle, is to make sure that everybody has at least seen what we are doing and has the possibility to discuss with us how that lands in their field of expertise, in their ministry, in their top sector, or so in their sector, if you will. And this way, we try to keep things aligned a little bit, but it's not perfect. Let me just say that out loud. Yeah.
What are the representatives? What's at the-
They're generally directors of innovation teams within, for instance, the Ministry of Health. So the Ministry of Health also has an innovation team. Their director will join our meeting 4 times a year, and vice versa. So it's a lot of meetings. Yeah.
It's clear in your mind, so that's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Any final question?
I have a
Giovanni.
very nasty one.
Great.
Because initially we don't get to have the missionary government, like if they don't find an agreement, we have to go to the election. So I
Right.
wanted to ask, how is the experience of being civil servant with the missionary government? Is it better, like not to have constant new initiative?
It's a great question. It's well, that's personal, I think. It was it's so we have a really wonderful minister. We had he's leaving now. But he's a very progressive climate he really stands for the mission. So he's been within, the mandate that you may have as a commission minister. He's been very much pushing for, let's, still pass this law. If we can get it through the chamber, we can. So it's been pretty good. I didn't mind it. It's not ideal because something is looming in the distance and it feels like things are slowly coming to a halt. You can't really make new policy anymore for like a year. But that doesn't mean, that everything that's in place just continues to go. So it wasn't that bad. It was my first time with the decommission minister. I don't know how you felt, but
Yeah, maybe very practically as well. We have a whole process where the chamber gets together and votes if there are any topics that are very controversial and need to be shut down.
Oh.
And this time, very little topics got classified as controversial. So that means that, like you said, anything that was already sort of already rolling, you can just finish whatever you're doing. But I definitely recognize that idea of, is everything we're doing right now just going to change completely? Like you said, we're getting new ministries. We're getting very different ministers. So
Perfect. Then we can move on to the next
Yeah.
part of the session that we have first round of questions. Well, a question. So what are the challenges that this political
shit.
hopefully
You okay?
everyone's okay. What are the challenges that maybe no, everyone's okay. What are the challenges that this policy design approach may pose to implementation? I think we have discussed some of those, but it'd be good if in groups of 3, you can discuss this for 10 minutes or so, and then we have a plenary discussion. If you know the person in your group, change groups, don't be boring, get to know someone new. And also that might be a good reason if you don't like them, to change groups. So there you go,
Good
10
one.
minutes. Well, I guess go for it.
You brought it up here because I feel like it's crazy
Like, that's what it's here.
Yeah.
Or you can join in one here. No. Giovanni, one here. There's 3 already.
That's consistent kind of structure.
And then, yeah, you can join that one.
Thank
Sorry.
you.
I'm sorry. I got 2 presentations open and I went to the other one because that was.
Fine, I
Yeah.
think I was able to tell.
It's so complicated.
I know, right?
Wow.
Did you somehow get it?
So this is
Nobody gets it.
this is the thing of like, this is what's next in like mission theory and practice governance, right? Like what is, there's not going to be one right answer, but what are the mechanisms that inform governance? And in your case, there's a lot of like, because as you're saying, like your culture is influenced by processes and structure. Most of the places, my understanding, are man-made, they're not organic. It's not like if I was in South America, like it would be like, yeah, we got a coffee or something like that. You know what I mean? Like I'm not
Yeah.
saying, I'm not just putting on it's very formal.
Yeah.
Right. And pick whatever group that have 3. And that seems really stressful from my perspective of like being like if I had to have in my mind all these spaces of coordination, then it will be really burdensome
Yeah.
in my own like mental health.
Yeah. No, I get that. When I just started,
All right. Thanks, everyone. I'm sorry to break the discussion. But it'll be good to hear your thoughts. So if anyone wants to go and share their thinking, any group, I'm gonna point blindly to this group. Share your thinking. What are your thoughts around this question?
Shift from being the government, being leading rather than and being rather convener, and that's a bit confusing sometimes for people around to follow and become active within that.
Yeah.
The linguist side agendas, I think you like the unintended consequences, also other agendas for public departments. Challenge of who owns the mission around the governance. The critique of that governance being messy, and therefore how do you just justify that, and how do you communicate it and put together progress. I think that was some of the points I haven't made nothing else. That was a summary.
Right.
Any reaction from
Do
you?
you want to?
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think those are all very true. So that would be my first response. That is something that is part of our day-to-day. And I think that is what is nice about this session is when you get down to the practice of it, you you realize all these small things, all these challenges that need to be addressed. And some of them are a little more urgent than others. So right now, I think one of the biggest challenges we have is to make that complexity of the governance understandable for people to still be enthusiastic about the mission without getting stuck in the what meeting is this, who's deciding what, it's unclear. So so bringing a little bit perspective to the people who are active in the mission space is one of the more urgent challenges that we have right now. But that is something we are working on. The other challenges are going to have to wait because the actual challenge, the innovation, getting the innovation going for the energy transition is, of course, the most important. And we only have so many people, so much money, and so much time to address everything. Because otherwise, it's not a technological issue, right? I think we have the resources to make the energy transition happen in time in the Netherlands, anyway. It's the doing that in a smart, strategic way with in a political context, with the means that we get allocated to us that makes it so difficult. So I hope that gives a little bit of an idea of how we deal with that.
Just gonna say we had this discussion around kind of stakeholder and legitimacy. So when you're bringing like various people together, and obviously it's difficult in terms of kind of different people's thoughts and processes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also when you're bringing kind of experts together with other experts, and who's the bigger expert.
Yeah.
So I'm saying I'm kind of bringing it back to my experiences working in an NHS environment where you give a certain kind of power, I suppose, to one set of kind of employees who don't then necessarily consider the expertise of the others to be kind of at the level regardless. So I think that's where and government as well, where you put people into positions and all of a sudden they are experts, but they're not. So I think that's what we were just discussing, is that real struggle in terms of bringing stakeholders together and kind of egos not being the main driver behind it.
Yeah, that's one of the critiques we get sometimes, that the top sectors become little kingdoms of people who think, who seem to think they know best. They're just executing, well, for a large part, executing policy. And that's there's a piece of I guess political or governmental theory is about how politics can be emotion and the government can be reason. If you want to make that the separation, then I think it's just the reason. So the data, the science, the The consensus, which is in the Netherlands very important, the consensus is what we listen to. And there's going to be individuals who think otherwise. There's going to be individuals who think that we should be focusing and putting money into energy from water, for instance, in the Netherlands, which the consensus is that doesn't make sense. And trying as a government to get that consensus to land in politics, but also in society is I guess part of policy making. But yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, and we do definitely have very loud individuals who will lobby the second chamber to ask really difficult questions about choices that we made that we have to then answer again. But it's, yeah, we try. As do you, I'm sure.
Any other requests? There.
We unfortunately just bombarded her with 8 million. It's used us even more, I think. What we understand is like terminology that almost better explains people's roles and departments that
Right.
aren't translatable to English necessarily. I just went down like a wormhole.
Yeah.
We explored the complexities.
You know, when I was asked to speak here and explain about our mission approach, I was really challenged because I was just telling Manuel, I've been here for a year and a half now. It took me, well, a year and a half to somewhat grasp what is going on, and I work in this on a day-to-day basis. So trying to explain that to you all has been like really challenging for me. So I hope I gave you at least some elements of what we do and the capabilities that we have to kind of make this mission work in practice. But I'm not expecting of any of you to actually understand what we are doing. How we are doing it. That'd be stretch. Thank you. Well,
Any? Or
Regarding the question of conflict, sorry, go for it.
yeah.
I was just gonna follow up on that.
Sure.
If you feel like, what is the sort of civil servant work experience, and like, did you feel that that is working? Because we reflected after the majority of our conversation, trying to figure out what's happening.
Right.
Kind of went like, oh, does it matter for us as outsiders to like really get it, you know? And you can
No.
sort of just speculate on challenges. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think you need to get it to. I don't think you need to get the complexity of it and understand all the layers that exist to use elements from it, perhaps if you think there's elements in there that are useful, and implement that elsewhere. We do not have the answer to how you're supposed to drive mission forward or anything. On the contrary, it's actually very hard to measure if we are making progress, especially to quantify it. We try to quantify it with how much CO2 reduction we have managed to establish year by year, but what part of that was innovation and what part of that came from the mission-driven approach, that's super hard to extract from those numbers. So it is the way that we know how to do it right now. And we see that innovation is happening, that it is building skills, that there is a movement going into a direction that we like to see. Is it fast enough? Is this the best way to do it? Honestly, nobody knows. And I think the IIPP also doesn't know.
Yeah.
That's why they're asking us to talk about it. So,
You got it there.
yeah.
Andy, or the team. Oh, no, sorry, you were, sorry, my apologies. Andy, go for it.
Andy is fine. Yeah.
You think about a few things. Just pick on one that we were wondering about. We're quite interested in how you created this sort of legal structure
Yeah.
that politicians could wriggle out of. There's elections going on everywhere in the world at the moment, and certainly not everyone agrees that climate change is a thing. And there is a question about how, I suppose, democratic it is to bind future governments to current government's commitments, and how that works in practicality.
You're completely right. That's a part of the discussion I had last night with Jacopo, that's not very democratic to kind of set in stone goals that a next a next government may completely disagree with. We, and I, in the Netherlands, have the EU that has embedded in law that we need to reduce CO2, which as a country, as part of the EU, we're supposed to adhere to. Otherwise, I don't know, otherwise we'll be fined. We'll be fined, which is, I don't want that, because that sounds expensive. Well, and also, I think in the Netherlands, the consensus, some parties aside, is that it's going to be a lot more expensive to mitigate climate change than to change our system into a more renewable energy system. So right now there's a right-wing party that became the biggest party, who literally in their program had one line about climate. It says the climate policy should go through the shredder, literally just shredder. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it said in their program, in their party program. But they are, in the Netherlands, we have a structure where there's not just one party, there's 4 parties forming a government. And the other 3 parties were like, no, man, that's, if it's fine, you became the biggest one, but we're not gonna put that through the shredder. We believe that's important. So we have that in our government structure as well, to kind of safeguard some of the more reasonable things that we have put into the law. But in theory, you're right. If a party would be so powerful to say we're not going to do anything about climate change anymore, then it's going to be, it's deconstructible. Everything can deconstruct everything. It's a little more difficult than just saying we're not going to do this anymore. So
on the question of complexity, some of the aspects we mentioned here was one, like, you are in a specific situation where you transformed from within an organization that exists with mission, which then would be a very different situation if you try to create things. Where do you sit it? How do you actually align everyone into it? Then secondly, there's also a layering issue. You are representing the federal government, but then there's also regional ones. There's also local ones that we were talking about here. That basically the mission needs to percolate, and also the drivers are really different. If you're on a governmental level, you might be more caring about the economy. If you're on the local level, maybe more about spatial planning or health or not.
Yeah.
So there's kind of in that. And then thirdly, I think there's also a critical point is how do you make this not a democratic issue that everyone can participate into it?
Yeah.
How do you make civil society understand the mission?
Yeah.
So also take ownership of it, not just in saying what you want that mission to be, but also how do you, if you have an impact measurement, how do you actually enable people to say, well, that 0.1% is mine. Like I am in this.
Yeah.
How do you make people entitled to say they are part of it?
Well, there's a multitude of ways to make society part of this change. And what we did in the Netherlands, which has worked rather well, and I think in many other European countries too, is to incentivize people to adopt greener energy, greener choices in their lives. So solar panels are subsidized, heat pumps are subsidized. Also, there's we always say you want to. That doesn't translate well. You want to make policy that that not only just gives people money, right? But you want to push them in the right direction. So that also means you have to cut off some directions, make it really interesting to go in that one direction. So that's the heat pumps and the solar panels on a very personal level. The electric vehicles. There's the policy that we have in place are not perfect and not always working well. So sometimes they also get thrown out again. But those are ways to involve people and to make it part of their experience, their positive experience with the energy transition. When it comes to spatial planning, we have a very small country and a lot of people, so that's a big challenge. That requires a lot of innovation as well. So within our strategic department, we try to make several maps of the Netherlands in 2050 where do certain structures, how does the energy mix, what does the energy mix look like? What spatial kind of needs do we have for that future plan? And go into the country and talk with the people and with the local governments who are going to be dealing with those plans and with those different scenarios, in order to find out, can we make space for this? So that is one of the ways that we're really trying to create a perspective of 2050, really make that very tangible for people, in order to incentivize them to move along with it. But it's of course also a very technical transition that requires the whole technical aspect of actually changing the system. But that is one of the things that we do.
Great.
Talk a little bit. Yeah.
So we have one more round of questions, and then you're free for lunch. So this question is thinking about some of the ideas that you think you can implement to tackle the issues that have been raised around governance, these different layers, coordination, structures. So what would you do to navigate these issues? And what do you think will be the key to success? So similar again, 10 minutes of discussion, then you can do whatever you like. And yeah, and then we have another final session or a final space to talk again.
I'm curious what you guys come up with. I can use some advice, so.
Dan, don't join, Andrew. Come on. We don't need two designers in the same room. That's right.
You need some.
There's so many layers. Just the top sectors, the and everything. The top sector.
I mean, there is so much. Then it's
Explain to me that they also
bureaucratic, but yeah, maybe it is. I'll stop there. Yeah.
Yeah, we were discussing, and I was making the contrast with Peru that after its military government of the 80s, all its presidents has been are either investigated or in jail. So that's a fun fact for you guys about my home country. So that makes it really difficult, to have these long-term policies, and pretty much nothing is set in stone in Peru. We just have good food. That's all we need.
Yeah.
Anyone else wants to share their traumatic experience about their home?
Or does anybody have the key to success?
Yes, exactly. Two different questions, but both of them really painful.
We thought, we were sort of we were discussing about taking it out of the kind of institutional structure and trying to make it more about having a conversation about individuals.
Yeah.
And their role in missions. And firstly about whether how officials feel obliged or part of the system to take part and contribute to a mission. We wondered whether they could be kind of missions might be written into people's management objectives of all staff. So in some whatever small thing they are doing, that they're kind of contributing in some way. And then we kind of extended the analogy into some more imagination territory about citizens as well. And how do you kind of, create a sense of ownership around missions with citizens, whether that is, comparison I suppose, with officials, where there's a sort of a feeling of duty that you should do something, but maybe also about sharing the benefits so that, have some kind of dividend around or payout, around sort of benefits of green transition that so people physically get the money. The idea about the energy communities, people, communities got a windmill, that they kind of get the payout from the energy.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yeah. So that really touches upon the just transition, right? So you don't want people to suffer from a transition that we think is great, but actual citizens may not benefit from it. And maybe big companies or government is. So that's a really good point. I try to challenge myself to keep thinking about what is the societal impact of any innovation that we have. But I find that difficult. I think, it's sad to admit that's not always easy, because it doesn't always necessarily, if I look at myself or my own family, it doesn't always relate directly to me. I know I can have an impact in how I act as an individual, but, and I think that's what drove me towards government in the first place. Government has a really important role to play in this transition. And it also has a role to play in making it a just transition. That means that the benefits, but also the pain that it's going to cause, and it's going to cause some financial pain for sure. That is spread equally and evenly over the society, and that people who are suffering the most will not be impacted by it. So that is definitely something that we are trying to incorporate as well into our thinking, and that's not just innovation. That's the whole policy making process around climate change and the energy transition. But that is a really important point, which I sometimes really find hard to visualize on a very individual level. For Pete and Katie somewhere in the south of the country, sitting on a couch, not being able to pay their energy bill, or having a windmill in the backyard that they really don't want to see, or they find very intrusive, which makes sense. That's definitely a big part of policymaking as well. But that is not always easy to make tangible.
Any other group that wants to share? I've seen this group.
So we were discussing about the challenge on how we communicate complexity and how to navigate complexity. So we identified the challenge of how difficult it is sometimes for some people to not have a clear plan or have a directionality, but not have a real, like, tangible process that they are following. And so different ideas on how we can navigate that. And we were discussing the idea of using metaphors. So using how we are, so like, for instance, like using the gardening metaphor. So we are gardening and how in gardening you cannot predict what will happen. So how do you like incorporate that in the process, that you have a direction of building a garden, but not a clear plan. And then we started to like build an argument around that, like there might be some people, some traditional policymakers that would come and say, yeah, but a garden is something that is not serious, that's a hobby, we're here doing serious jobs, so what are you talking about gardening? So then the response to that would be that in gardening there is also engineering, right? There's like agriculture engineering, there's R&D, and there's a lot of innovation that goes into that. So I guess our discussion went on imagining how we're going to have those conversations with some traditional policymakers and some of the arguments that we're going to use in that aspect.
That's a really brilliant metaphor. I really like it. It just got me thinking, like making a digital version of that would also be really cool. Like a digital version of where you want to go with the garden or the energy system, if you will, and then and then kind of all those elements that are going to make that happen and how you need to tend to that. That's interesting. I like it.
That verb tend was the key there, maybe, as in, I think also came from your point about how do you deal with unforeseen circumstances, or equally take advantage of serendipity. So many science and technology innovations have come by accident. Putting two things together you didn't expect to work, but and so the answer is you're tending, you're engaging to whatever it might be, because then you can have a plan, as you said. I want the garden to be like this, but nature is going to do what it does. And so what do? Well, okay, we'll take that. If that didn't work there, we'll try over here and do this and do this. And you slowly then cultivate and build over time. And that works well for those circumstances when you have uncertainty, but you also have.
Yeah. And you need people to go along with your plan.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
We have time for one more intervention, unfortunately. So one group is not going to be. So and the wrap up. So any of the two groups wants to that group maybe? Yeah, go for it.
There's a question of participation into this.
Yeah.
Because in the end, what missions are doing is crowding in or putting people into one town. In the end, what you want to do is to create desire. So you want people to desire to be part of this mission. So part of that conversation is participation also of citizens, and how do you make that happen in a way that is not usually the same people showing to every single meeting. So you're talking about the trees in the streets, it's going to be this one guy knowing a retired person, and then you're going to talk about the direction of the economy. It's going to be the same guy here.
I know.
And how do you feel? We all know. And so some of the examples were here, like you can also do this by having some returns, like financial returns. What if you participate into the overall taxation system in Brazil, for instance, where you can actually buy, say, I'm going to have my VAT number from this node. That means everyone is basically participating to the tax evasions are being reduced. Or another example would be from again here about just go in the street, just instead of saying like, look, we have this really nice fancy room, come in if you have time. Why don't you just go in the street and just talk to people, and then you ask what do they think about certain topics. So you go to them rather than them going to you. So that's a big question. I don't know how you deal with it about participation of citizens in general.
I think that's two separate things. So the participation part, so engaging larger groups of people around the energy transition, making them benefit from it. That is not easy. But we are trying to make that happen by changing some of the laws, the energy law that we have since like the 60s or something. We just adopted a new energy law that makes it possible to form communities around generating renewable energy and then profiting from that. So those are ways in that you can kind of make it tangible and interesting for people to participate in it. Not everybody wants to participate in it, and I found that a really telling thing in the booklet that we got yesterday. It said something involve the willing or have the willing participate.
They were
Pick the willing, yeah. So don't pick the winners, pick the willing. When it comes to the energy transition, it is those parties that you wanna engage. So everybody who's not willing, it's fine. You do you. But everybody who's willing needs to have the opportunity to participate, and we will, as a government, try to facilitate for them to do what they want to do, even fund in part what they want to do, in order for them to contribute to this change that we're trying to make. So does that answer your question? Because I sometimes get lost.
Thanks, everyone. We are, yes, 1 minute we have 1 minute to wrap up. But I want to thank Marjolaine again for her time and for being here. Thank you all. You've been an amazing group. And yeah, go enjoy lunch.
So many good questions. So